Ross Hunt, principal at Hunt Research, which is a Republican polling and data firm. Thank you so much and welcome back to Eye on Politics.
Thank you, Jack. Good morning.
And so here we are, 4.5 months out from the primary, the March 3rd primary. You're not working for any of the Republican primary candidates in the U.S. Senate race. So how do you assess this race shaping up right now?
It's a really exciting race. We have a U.S. Senate race that's in a dead heat right now. And it's something that many didn't anticipate at the beginning of the year. I think at the beginning of the year in the polling that I ran on my own in January of 2025 and many others ran, it looked like Senator Cornyn was in a very bad position. And there was even speculation that he might not choose to run again. And Attorney General Paxton was viewed as a very formidable opponent. Now, I think over the course of the 6 months following that, through June, and up through even October, the senator proved that he could spend money through his campaign and his PAC, and he succeeded in repairing his image. And now he sat in a very good position relative to Paxton when Wesley Hunt announced and entered the race just a week ago. And now we have Hunt rapidly rising after Cornyn has risen back up to Paxton, and so we have the three of them almost in a dead heat at this point. As we're just 4 months out from the election.
How significant is that? Because as you said, Wesley Hunt just got in a month ago. Paxton's been in since the spring, and Cornyn obviously is trying to hold on for a fifth term. And the fact that Cornyn was able to bounce back, A, did that surprise you? And B, is it a big deal?
It did surprise me, and I think it is very significant. I think I never wrote the senator off, but I think like many others, I was pessimistic about his ability to come back. I've worked on a lot of campaigns, and I worked for a lot of incumbents and against a lot of incumbents, and in many of those cases, incumbent elected officials damage themselves so much in the eyes of the electorate, or they are viewed as so stale that even if they spend as much money as one could possibly imagine, they can't repair the situation they're in. But Cornyn has proven that's not the case with him. He was able to spend money, a lot of money, and it had a positive effect and allowed him to climb back. And so that's very significant. It means that he's still very much in the hunt, and that even if he dips back down, he can advertise, he can tell his story, and he can move back up. And so I wouldn't be surprised if Hunt is making the argument he's dipped a little bit. I think we have to wait a little bit to see if that's true. But even if it is true, it doesn't mean that he can't rebound. So Cornyn is not out of this fight. Hunt has been rising very steadily, but also swiftly in the last couple of months. In a poll that I ran to build models beginning of last October, I already showed him at over 20% of the vote. Yeah, he was at 19% of the vote, with Paxton at 28 and Cornyn at 24. And that was the day that he announced. And then his own internal polling that he just released, which I regard as largely credible a week ago, he says that he's at 26 and Cornyn is at 27, and it's tied with Paxton at 34. So he's been rising very, very swiftly. Now, will that continue indefinitely? We don't know. But the race is interesting in this regard, too, in that Paxton has not been releasing his polling and has not been doing as much advertising. He's campaigning actually a lot more like an incumbent, even though he's the challenger, because he thinks he has a strong position as someone who's trying to situate himself far to the right. And so he is waiting. The other two don't have the luxury to wait. Cornyn because he has to repair his image, and Hunt because he needs to rise. And so I think all three of the candidates have really been doing an excellent job so far at what they had to accomplish. And they've put themselves in a position now where it really is a three-way split.
And you talked a little bit about the variety of polls. I think the last poll you mentioned that Paxton was at 34% was from Stratus.
That's right, yeah.
And I don't know if they are tied to any, I don't know if they're tied to Paxton or not, but what do you make of that? Because your poll,
the last poll I mentioned was with him at 30, with Paxton at 34, was I think a Hunt internal poll. I'm not sure if that's Stratus or not, but that's Hunt's polling.
Okay.
Wesley Hunt, not Ross Hunt. But.
Okay, right. Okay, because I seem to remember Hunt had it at the Wesley Hunt campaign had Cornyn at 26, Paxton at 25, Hunt at 24, 26 unsure.
Right.
And so, I mean, the fact that it's that close, what are they going to have to do to separate themselves to try to get into what everybody thinks is going to be the runoff?
You know, for Cornyn, it's about consolidating the anti-Paxton vote. And so if you look at the crosstabs, the subgroups of the polling, Cornyn is in sort of a difficult position because, at least in my polling, and I imagine it's similar with others, he's not winning among the Republicans who describe themselves as very conservative. He's tied or winning with Republicans who describe themselves as somewhat conservative or moderate. But you know, as everyone knows, there aren't a lot of those types of Republicans in Texas. So he needs to completely consolidate first anyone who doesn't regard themselves as very conservative. He needs to play to his strengths. He's got some regional strength in DFW. He has strength with certain groups of voters, like voters who are slightly less religious or intense in their religiosity. And so he'll be trying to just maximize his share in all these groups. And he's also going to try to drive up turnout, because as someone with an extremely high name identification and an appeal to more independent-leaning voters, he wants the number of new voters and lower propensity voters to be as high as possible. So that's sort of Cornyn's lane. And also, like every incumbent, he's constantly fighting to elevate himself. And then they're going to attack him. You know, already like Paxton has been attacking him, and Hunt will attack him. They're going to try to bring him down. He needs to try to just boost himself up in terms of turnout and vote share as much as possible. Now, Hunt is in an interesting position where he has some flexibility. He can pull either from Paxton's vote share or from Cornyn's vote share. And he has the luxury of pulling from Paxton's vote share without necessarily attacking him yet. So whenever you are running one of these multi-candidate races, if you can get where you want to go without attacking, that's the best way to go about it. Because people don't like a bully. They don't like someone who's throwing punches most of the time. And the way that Hunt can get some vote share from that currently belongs to Paxton is that a lot of people who are voting for Paxton, I think, are voting for him not because they love Ken Paxton, but just because they want someone who they regard as conservative or having sort of a far-right ideology, or they're dissatisfied with things that Cornyn has done. And so Hunt is going to try to maximize his share of that group of voters. And he's also going to try to pull a few voters from Cornyn as well, who are just anti-Paxton voters who'd be glad to vote for somebody that's not Cornyn.
My question is, you know, there seems to be a lot of back and forth between Cornyn and Hunt lately. Hunt's going after him and Cornyn's age. Mm-hmm. Cornyn's response is, I work closely with 79-year-old President Trump. Hunt comes back and says, Cornyn is not Trump. Yeah. And Hunt doesn't seem really criticize Paxton all that much, to your point. Is that so that, you know, Hunt is trying to consolidate the non-Paxton people just as Cornyn is, right, to get into that runoff and then try to take out Paxton, unload on, you know, perceived baggage, et
That's
cetera.
exactly right, Jack. And yeah, it has to do, the tactics they're taking right now, Cornyn and Hunt campaigns, have to do with the way that campaigns try to manage favorability and unfavorability in the way that candidates see voters to change their vote share. And so if you're an incumbent and you're trying not to see your vote share fall, you're not going to be able to increase your own favorables. You're not going to be able to increase the number of people who like you. So you have to punch down. You have to try to drive up Hunt's unfavorables and make people dislike him, if only to slow him down. Now, when you're a challenger, you don't have to have a high ratio of people who like you to people who dislike you. It's okay if there's kind of a mix, because you're the alternative. And so Hunt is comfortable attacking Cornyn, even if it causes some of his own unfavorables to rise, because he needs to bring Cornyn down. And then Cornyn on his side is trying to make Hunt he's trying to make Hunt someone who isn't so likable that he can continue to rise swiftly. Because right now the rate of ascent that he's shown in his vote share is so swift that if it continues, that Cornyn is going to fall precipitously.
And is Cornyn in trouble?
Yeah, Cornyn has been in trouble since day one. I mean, he is an incumbent who is having to fight almost like a challenger to hold on to his position. But again, he's not out of the fight yet because it remains to be seen where his floor is, and we know that he can tell his story, and then people find the story of what he's accomplished in his legislation to be persuasive.
And so when do you think we will get a better idea of how this is really going to go?
I think we are going to have to wait a while. I mean, I think unless Hunt is extremely effective at rising swiftly and pulling from Cornyn, I don't think he's going to be. I think he's going to hit a wall, and I think that we're not going to see that shift considerably. We might see him get up to Cornyn's level, right, to parity. Maybe he even gets a little higher, but I think he's going to have trouble pushing past the 30% mark, or the mid-30s, before we get close to early voting. And so there's going to be a long slog, and then at a certain point, people may start taking swings at Paxton to try to pull more, or rather, Hunt may start taking swings at Paxton to try to pull more vote share for him as we get closer to early voting. But we're not really going to know until we get about 3 weeks out from Election Day, and everyone starts ramping up their advertising for the final push into the beginning of early voting in person.
And do you think that Paxton's divorce and the way that it was characterized by his now ex-wife, State Senator Angela Paxton, biblical issues?
Yes.
Does that hurt? Did that hurt Paxton?
Well, it certainly doesn't help him. I think that whenever it was one of these controversies arises, people always raise the question of, well, does this matter to voters anymore? In the age of Trump or in the age of whatever. I think it does matter less. And then, of course, the question you have to ask is, well, why are the political action committees using it? Why are the campaigns using it if it's not effective? And here's why I think they're doing that. I think there are a lot of voters, I know there are a lot of voters out there who, even from the early days of Paxton's candidacy as Attorney General, had questions about his character. And back then, in his initial candidacy, not so much even his character in his private affairs as in his legal practice and in his business affairs. And of course, this all came to a head very prominently in the attempt to impeach the Attorney General. And I think that one of the main purpose of reminding people of all of the details, messy details of the divorce, is to place a big question mark over Ken Paxton's character for a lot of voters. There are voters for whom character really does matter, and there are good academic studies on this that demonstrate this, that voters do not really care as much about either the perceived intellectual capacity or the moral character of candidates running for lower offices. They think that they're kind of, cynically or not, they think they're just kind of interchangeable. Or if they have the right political principles, they don't really care, as long as they're a Republican or the right kind of Republican. The more you move up the ballot, the more voters do care. Because voters are not dumb. Like, they know that a U.S. senator is extremely powerful, that they're more powerful than the leaders of most foreign nations with regard to foreign and domestic policy. And so I think what the Cornyn campaign is trying to do with these marital allegations isn't really to carve off support for Paxton among religious voters, although it would be great if they could do that for them, because he has a lot of support among religious voters. Mostly it's just to remind all the people who had questions about Paxton's character that there are reasons to think that his character is questionable.
Any other points you want to make about this race that you think people should know that I haven't asked you about?
Sure, yeah, I think this is a very interesting race, which is analogous in many respects to the 2014 and 2012 statewide primaries. For those of us who are old enough to remember, these were the U.S. Senate primary that propelled Senator Cruz, who then was just a Solicitor General, not even an elected official, to U.S. Senate. Unprecedented victory. And then also that propelled Lieutenant Governor Dan Patrick into power. And of course, Patrick now holds essentially sole control of the Texas State Senate. in addition to those sort of significant consequences of those elections, I think the thing that makes this similar is it's a big statewide election in a year which otherwise doesn't have a contested election. It's going to drive up turnout. My voter modeling predicts that turnout could go as high as almost 2.5 million votes in the Republican primary. That would be more than either the 2020 or the 2024 Republican primaries, less, however, than the 2016 presidential primary, which is still their big record at 2.8. That would be similar to 2012 and 2014, which were higher than the previous primaries, but not a total record.
Yeah.
And what do we see happen in those elections? We saw the Republican electorate completely remade. 2012 and 2014 were the years where the Tea Party and the conservatives really took control of the party. And that became the sort of the defining principle of the party moving forward, is the battle between the self-defined far right and the people they called centrists. Now, I think we have a similar watershed moment where we have high turnout in a gubernatorial year. We have a lot of other races going on underneath it. And there may be an opportunity now for the party to redefine itself at a moment where the party's identity is, I think, in question, as we sort of, we're moving, the end of the Trump presidency is in sight, and people are starting to wonder, what do we really stand for? And so I think this primary is going to be an opportunity for the U.S. Senate candidates, but also everyone underneath, to articulate their vision of what the Republican Party stands for. It also may be an election in which the likeliest voters, both in this primary and in the runoff, are not necessarily the most ideologically intense or far-right conservative voters, because we've had so much vote history build up over time that at this point, at least in the crosstabs that I'm looking at, there isn't a massive advantage for Paxton over Cornyn among the highest propensity voters. And that's a different situation than what we had in 12 and 14.
So you don't think that Paxton really has a lock on grassroots conservatives as of right now?
He has a lock on people who would identify themselves as grassroots conservatives, but the voters who are likeliest to vote no longer perfectly overlap with that group. There are a lot of very likely voters who came out to vote, in many cases for Trump for the first time in 2016, who are voting, who just think of themselves as Trump voters, and they don't necessarily consider themselves beholden to whoever raises their hand to say, I'm the most conservative. Because, of course, that wasn't Trump's position in his primary. He wasn't trying to be the Ted Cruz of the 2016 Republican primary. He wasn't trying to compete along that illusory axis of left to right, right? So I think we're going to have an opportunity to see what the future of the Republican Party looks like, starting right here in Texas in March.
Ross Hunt of Hunt Research, thank you so much.
Thank you, Jack.
Yeah, we appreciate it.
My pleasure.